yeah, I'll get into my little
Yeah,
thing.
go ahead. Take
Yeah,
it
let's
away.
do it. So lots of really stressful things happen in this film. Obviously, we said like both in who created it as well as what takes place on screen. It ultimately ties back to horror's overarching issue of using women's bodies and minds as a staging ground to enact their effed up fantasies of violence, gore, and torture on screen. There are countless issues showcased in this film, so finding resources for this was a little challenging because it really does touch on like everything for the
Mhm.
most part, including like sexual assault, domestic violence, patriarchal oppression, and more. A big piece of what was really stressful about this film, other than the overt violence against Rosemary, was the consistent gaslighting she received throughout. In addition, an additional point of stress was the film's decision to like thoroughly embrace the not all men narrative in the character of Hutch,
Mm.
taking it the additional next step in stance that good men will be weeded out and murdered because that's what they do to him, and that for
Mhm.
survival, good men should instead be like Dr. Hill, masquerading as a safe person until it is no longer convenient for them.
Yeah, like, look what can happen to you. Like,
Hmm.
don't help.
Exactly. And I think like if the film is conveying a message to the audience, that was the goal
Mhm.
in a lot of ways. It was if men are watching, let them know that they should not be speaking up for women. If women are watching, let them know how little they matter.
Because that's how
Um,
hopeless it is.
mhm. So essentially, these men and the women in the film who benefit from Rosemary's subjugation in the film see Rosemary as a vessel to their future goals and not as an actual person. And that, as we've been saying, this is largely a reflection of how society during this time period, but also arguably currently, view women and their bodies. As Gabe kind of mentioned, where Guy views his wife as a vessel for his success, the other characters see Rosemary as a vessel for the spawn of Satan, a vessel for a child. Her personhood to the larger group is determined by whether or not she decides to embrace that role of being a mother, and her life only of value if she chooses to stay in that role, choose being
Mhm.
loose, because there was not much of a choice. This is very much how society currently views women and can be seen in the laws being passed in reference to the attacks against Roe v. Wade and other legislation aiming to disenfranchise and subjugate women. Rosemary's personhood to Guy didn't exist at all.
Mhm.
To Guy, Rosemary is his idea of her, and who she actually is doesn't matter to him, and clearly didn't matter to the director or the person who wrote this book. Guy and men like him are a part of why, one, the divorce rate is so high in heteronormative relationships,
Mhm.
because no one wants to be with someone who doesn't recognize their personhood. And because of patriarchal oppression, men often fulfill that role. As we see in the film and in other films like it, women do enact patriarchal violence as well if they're benefiting from it. So if we
Mhm.
think of white feminism versus intersectional feminism, um,
Or like in Black Christmas, the new one, where the
and
girl helped.
yeah, exactly, because she felt she was protected in this patriarchal society when no women are safe in a patriarchal society, even the
Mhm.
ones who uphold it.
Yeah.
That's even a plot theme in Handmaid's Tale, and I'm
Yeah, the
sure countless
wives.
other things, where the entire ploy of getting access of upholding patriarchal standards is because they want to benefit in the same way white men benefit,
Yeah.
and they
So they
want
can't have
access
it
to that
change.
power.
Yeah.
But ultimately, in a patriarchal, oppressive society, they will never have access to that power. It's just ultimately a long game manipulation ploy
Mhm.
upheld by men.
Love
So
it.
fun. So the reason a relationship like Guy and Rosemary's even exists or existed um, is only because there was no other option, because there was not a choice. There was the illusion of choice, but not an actual choice.
Mhm.
And
Who
some
is she
context.
without him?
Exactly. They did not give her an identity. And I think people often forget. It's kind of similar to the way that they historicalize, where they're like, this was so long ago. They do that with Black history. They do that with like slavery. They do that with civil rights, where they're like, this was forever ago. Everything's fine now. When the
Mhm.
reality is, so much of this historical context happened recently. Like the 1960s was a while ago, but it was not that long ago.
Mhm.
So
These
for
people are
con
still alive.
yeah,
You know?
there are still humans, like, that exist that were like, "I was there when that happened."
Yeah.
Anyway, but for context, the Marital Property Act of 1967, which gave married women the same property rights as their husband, went into effect January 1st, 1968. That is the same year this film came out. Discrimination was openly acceptable and not illegal at all until 1967. Roe v. Wade did not take place until 1973.
So it's also
Women
absurd that she mentioned abortion.
Well,
She
yeah,
can't
because
do that.
abortion existed, just safe abortion didn't exist.
Yeah.
From a familial history thing, my grandma was alive and in need of an abortion before it was legal, and my great grandmother had to drive her to Mexico to get it done. It was like a
Wow.
really traumatic event for her in her
Yeah.
life.
Oh my gosh.
So like it was not legal until 1973. Like my grandma's no longer alive, but she died fairly young.
Mhm.
So if she was healthier, she would have been alive to this point.
Yeah.
As if that was just like a Tuesday.
Yeah.
Um, so that is something that's fairly recent. The 70s was of like a collection of years ago.
Yeah.
Um, Women couldn't get credit cards in their own name until 1974.
Oh my god.
Spousal rape was not criminalized in all 50 states until 1993. That was the year I was born.
Oof.
Um, sex discrimination was not outlawed in health insurance until 2010.
Oh my god.
And there was a long list of things. I kind of just pulled the ones that were most upsetting, like in my face, and ones that were like the most easy to understand, because there were also a handful that were like pretty convoluted in their description. But I
Mhm.
do link the sources in the blog that I'm going to be talking about in a minute, as well as like the reference points to where I got that information and the fact checking that took place around
Mhm.
that. As my last little tidbit of information, women weren't allowed to serve in combat positions in the military until 2013. Today, we have still never had a woman president.
Mhm.
So, for anyone who's like, it's not that bad, like, we've literally still never run this country.
Yeah.
How can you say oppression doesn't exist? If it did, there would be a long history of women leadership, specifically at the highest office that we have available in our country, and that has never taken place. We had our first woman vice president like a few years ago.
Mhm.
So like it's not. A lot of the, like they like try to show pictures in like black and white and be like that was forever ago. It was like yesterday and it still exists, and that's
Yeah.
why we need to actively be like working to fight it. So for to like get kind of into the resources end of my section. In this episode, my resource section was centered on a little bit of everything because this film kind of was an amalgamation of issues, including. I'll link back to our episodes where we discuss abortion resources, sexual assault, and domestic violence resources, as well as like the other things that we've covered in the F the Patriarchy series, as they're all somewhat relevant in this film, as well as
Mhm.
just kind of always. But a lot of my resources specifically speak on intersectional feminism and feature BIPOC and LGBTQIA led feminist perspectives, because there is no freedom without all of us being free. So leading with those perspectives is essential. Um, Roxanne Gay says it best in their TED Talk, which I do have linked below. I reject the mainstream feminism that has historically ignored or deflected the needs of women of color, working class women, queer women, and transgender women in favor of supporting white, middle, and upper class straight cisgendered women. Listen, if that's good feminism, I am a bad feminist. And the Ghouls reject any feminism that does not include and rally for BIPOC and LGBTQIA women and gender nonconforming communities. And we think you should too. As we've said many times before, racist, homophobes, TERFs, and any other kind of bigoted,
Haters.
hate filled humans aren't welcome here.
Nope. This is not for you, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Exit stage left.
Yeah. So in taking in the resources in this blog too, I recommend like the following be considered, because it's led largely by BIPOC and LGBTQIA women and non-gender conforming communities. It's important to compensate those people. If you are specifically a white person like myself, I specifically implore you to recognize that the BIPOC emotional and physical labor that went into creating many of the resources that I have listed in this blog should be financially compensated if you have the means. I'll do my best to organize the ways to provide compensation in the blog as I find them, as well as places you can donate to support causes that support women, but also support BIPOC communities. This includes buying books listed digitally, supporting Ko-fis, Patreons, Venmos, GoFundMe's, etc. If you read through this blog and notice a source you personally utilize but is not listed, or if you know a person who created any of these resources below, but notice that there isn't a link to provide financial compensation to its creator, definitely send us an email at theghoulsnextdoor@gmail.com.
Hmm.
Um, as I've said in previous episodes, I'll be updating these resources over time. So if you're looking at this tomorrow at 8 a.m. when it is fresh off the presses, or I don't know what time we're posting this, but like if you look at it right when it is posted, take it at face value because it's going to be continually updated with time. And I'm hoping it'll kind of turn into this thing that can be actively looked at and be like and call to action and resource share for days to come, months to come, years to come. I want it to like be a usable document. So I'll be updating this over time, but if you know any resources that you think would be of use to be included in this blog and our other F the Patriarchy blogs, or if you're like looking through our blog, we get emails for that sometimes, and you're like, I think this resource that I know about would be really helpful here. Let us know. You can email us, you can comment, tag us, and we'll do our best to update our information. Additionally, I've done like my best to vet each resource as much as possible, but if you catch something I didn't, please do not hesitate to let us know so it can be removed if necessary. As someone who works in an industry that actively quality checks content before it goes out, it's happened many times where things will pass through publishers, graphic designers, and authors before they even hit my desk, and mistakes will still pop up even after being quality checked by like 20 people.
Hmm.
Like the last person will still notice that there's a mistake that all those other people missed just because that happens sometimes.
Every
So
time.
for Ghouls, it is just me and Gabe. So if you notice something we missed, please tell us and know we are genuinely doing the best we can with the current resources we have available. Hopefully one day we'll have even more humans that occupy the ghoul space and can do this kind of stuff too. So a lot of the resources that I have on here, I'll kind of outline each one. One that I just thought was helpful was how to recognize and stand up to gaslighting. So I have two links there. I also just provide like the historical sources and context that I referenced and kind of the one-off spits of all the horrible things that have happened historically and currently. There are a lot more things on that list, so I recommend taking a look. It is a Wikipedia article. I also link to our resources on sexual assault and abortion access that we created in our previous episode, as well as the domestic violence resources and methods to like make safety plans, et cetera. And I recommend checking out those episodes. There were a handful of things that I found really interesting. It made me want to read. So there's things you can add to your reading lists. Some books do repeat on various lists, but there are a lot of books on just intersectional feminism and like things that are impactful in the feminist space. So there are 3 links there that are hopefully very helpful and honestly make me want to read better. I don't read very often, like books. I can read online things all the time, but
Hmm.
books are hard because neurodivergent. But it made me really want to get on it. Gabe reads all the time.
I do.
But it is something that, yeah, it was a really cool list, and we want to get a lot of those books, so we recommend them to you as well. There was also blogs and news sources to follow. So there is My Body Is Not an Apology, the POC Online Classroom, Intersectional Feminism. That specific resource provides a lot of free access to reading materials. So as I kind of said before, please provide financial compensation to the authors listed if you have the means to do so. Obviously, this exists as an online classroom to educate and teach. So use it, but also recognize that a lot of labor went into creating that list, I'm sure, and all the resources that went in it. So it is the right thing to do to make sure that people are compensated for their labor.
Mhm.
Um, Black Girl Dangerous is another blog, women's major group, Center for Constitutional Rights, that offers a lot of resources on sexual and gender based violence, but also Women's History Month resources. There's a really cool resource that I found that was called Trans Days of Resilience. And it was kind of like this art blog and poetry blog that was kind of just like a happier resource. It was less like the world is
Mm.
horrible and like people exist and are creating wonderful things and there's ways to support them. So they have a zine called Trans People Exist in the Future, Art and Poetry Celebrating Trans Resilience that looked really
Mhm.
cool. There is a It's 2022 is your feminism intersectional on Gender Avenger. It's like a little, it's not like a quiz, but it's kind of like an overview for you to kind of self-evaluate if
Mhm.
your feminism is intersectional. And they actually have a cool resource on their website that allows you to kind of check people in real life. So, like, if you attend a conference and you want to know that it claims to be a feminist conference, but it's all white feminists, or there's a lot of men there despite the fact it's a feminist conference,
Mhm.
or you're just at an education conference and the people who they're talking about helping aren't at the table in the administration, in the speakers, et cetera. It gives this like tracking tool of ways you can kind of like document that and share it out as a point of activism. So I just thought that was a really cool tool that sounds like it could be pretty useful.
Mhm.
Um, there is a Disorient, a new resource for intersectional feminist thought, education, and activism. And there's also just like a handful of other resources. I also list a lot of things you can watch. So depending on your learning style, resources can only, as I said, I'm not great at reading books, but I can read articles for days. I can watch YouTube videos for days. I can listen to podcasts. So I have a section that's things to watch, listen to. I was not able to screen every single one of these before we recorded this because they're each an hour plus long, but they seemed pretty promising. I did listen to some of them. So just a handful of the one that a name that popped out a lot was Kimberly Crenshaw. They have a talk on race, gender, inequity, and intersectionality at Brown University, as well as a TED talk on the urgency of intersectionality. Um, there's also Roxane Gay, who I quoted earlier. Their entire TED talk is listed here. Janelle Monáe has a cool song that is a lyric video. What's more than cool? It's about Say Her Name, and it's about Black women that have been, or BIPOC women who have been impacted by police violence, murdered by police violence, et cetera. And it's just kind of like a really powerful song and visual portrayal of all of that. Um, and Kimberly Crenshaw also has a podcast on why intersectionality matters that they have an episode as recently as May 2022. So it is currently going. I also list resources for patients. So in that, there's like a wealth of resources, specifically pregnancy loss resources for Indigenous communities, breast cancer resources for Indigenous communities, gynecology and breast cancer resources, transgender support resources, reproductive justice resources, and patient rights during gynecology appointments. Considering the way in which one in this film we saw, but that gynecologist visits can be dangerous if done by someone who doesn't recognize someone's personhood. It is important to know how to advocate for yourself. So that is a resource that can kind of point you in that direction. I also specifically found a really cool website. It's called Point of Pride, and they list specific resources for transgender, gender queer, non-binary, gender fluid, gender non-conforming folks who exist under the non-cis identity of the trans umbrella, and they have resources where you can apply for surgery funds, hormone replacement therapy funds, electrosis support funds, free chest binders, and free femme shapewear, which just seemed like a really great resource to share out within this conversation.
Mhm.
I'm going to list petitions. There's nothing in there yet, but I will. Um, and then I just list a lot of organizations you can donate to. Obviously, that is to your decision making, as well as I tried to, as best as I could, link back to some of like the videos or blogs that I found, specific individuals who create those works and ways you can support their work. And last but not least, resources for healthcare professionals serving intersectional women and gender nonconforming communities, specifically BIPOC women's health for professionals. They list a lot of resources. Similarly, they had one for patients. This is mental health and prenatal period for newcomers, how to make your practice inclusive for LGBTQIA and BIPOC folks, addressing intergenerational transmission of trauma in Black women and with trauma informed care, ensuring cultural safety in relationships, and a trans health primer that is available for like medical practitioners who are looking to make their spaces more inclusive. So you're not Dr. Hill calling
Mhm.
the dangerous doctor in to come get Rosemary because you think she lost her mind. Like you can instead be an advocate for your patients, because just because you may not understand their lives, their personhood still exists, whether or not you think so or not. So it is
Mhm.
good to make the adequate advocacy efforts to make your space a safe space. And if you do not consider the personhood of individuals who don't align with your specific identity, you should do some self evaluation because that's a serious problem.
Yeah. And also like asking yourself like, should I be the one handling this? Same thing
Yeah,
as like, should these men be making these stories?
exactly. And I get it. Some people got a whole medical degree. They went there for 8 years, but or however long medical degrees take and how much money they cost. I get it. But if you're going to
Yeah.
exist in the space, at least don't be damaging
Mhm.
and also recognize when you maybe shouldn't exist in the space.
Yeah.
Find a different career.
Make space for other people instead and lift them up. Use your platforms, which is
Exactly.
what we're doing. So definitely support. Check out all the resources. Leave us comments and emails on your with your thoughts. If this is like your favorite film ever, I'm sure there's a good reason. Like with regards to cinematography or it is, like, really suspenseful, it makes you uncomfortable, and maybe you learned from it, and I think that's great for you. Love that, but we didn't love it. Now I wanna watch
Yeah.
that show to see how, Agnieszka did it, so, um,
Yeah.
interested. But if you were disappointed with Rosemary's Baby, if you'd watched it and you didn't get what the whole deal was, and we can relate to that, then we highly, highly recommend Lyle as a great alternative. It's short and it is just as suspenseful and it will,
Mhm.
tug at your heartstrings and make you feel things. Um, and it keeps you on that quest the entire time.
Yeah. And there's hope. So that
Yes,
part's
and there's hope.
cool.
Spoilers.
Um, yeah. And if you're like an activist and you're out there doing the thing and you want us to tell people about you, let us know.
Please do. Please do.
Yeah.
If you're an organization and you need support in that way too, you want to highlight some of the programs, let us know. We want to support you. And yeah, we have 2 more episodes left in our F the Patriarchy series, and then we're going to be going and doing something else. So very excited to move on. Stop being so depressed.
Yeah.
Although I don't think that's ever going to happen. We're always depressed on this
All
show.
of our series end up in some way being the F the patriarchy, F the capitalism, F the race. It ends up all,
F all the oppressive systems.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it does, even when we're like, let's be happy for a little bit, we usually end up being like, oh, there it is again.
Yeah, yeah.
What can it do?
Even when we do horror movie musicals, you're like, "Oh, this is upsetting." Yeah, I mean, that just comes with the territory, and kinda like what Roxane Gay was saying, right? If not talking about those issues and really highlighting the power of horror, um, makes is, like if, like, not talking about it is good film analysis and podcasting, then we're bad podcasters, and that is fine. Like we're
Yeah.
gonna be that. Um,
Yeah.
And I will say this as far as like in news of like horror's impact that made me very excited was the news about Rod Sterling, and what influenced him to create Twilight Zone was that he wanted to talk about Emmett Till, and they censored him. And so he
Yep.
created an entire phenomenal show about society and the problems that were occurring in this way that was more digestible to the audience and that could go under the radar or can be. And also for all the people who are really upset of how woke the new Twilight Zone was under the helm of Jordan Peele, that just makes so much sense that he is the successor of this entire
Yeah.
series, given what started it all. So
Yeah, it was always woke. It's kind of like people who get mad at Watchmen, the
yeah,
new one, for being, and it was like always anti-capitalist.
yeah. It's like people who
Right?
don't
Isn't that the
understand.
similar?
It's like people that don't understand, like, when again they put their Punisher sticker on their car and it has the thin blue line, and it's like you didn't read those,
The
did
Punisher hated
you?
cops. Like, yeah.
You didn't do that. It's fine.
Yeah.
Again, and like Kat said, we are very clear about what kind of show we are and what our values are, and we have no qualms about saying that. So
Yeah.
if you don't like it, you can leave. You do not have
Yeah.
to watch this.
iTunes should add a media literacy film category, like film review category, because
They
it
should.
doesn't. That's why we're listed under film review, because there isn't a category for what we do.
Hmm.
Um, so if they make one, cool. But until then, if you don't like it, like let us know, I guess. But within reason.
It's okay. You
Um,
can just leave.
yeah.
And if you are liking it, please
Also, let us.
like and subscribe. Definitely let us know that you're out there. Support us. We have our own coffee account and more. So definitely let us know how you're feeling. And we hope you enjoyed this episode and the next two as well. Uh, I think the next episode is gonna be really fun. And don't get married,
Delete your kids.
or your kids bring about the end of the world.